Was this the beginning of a new era in asymmetric warfare over Crimea? On the evening of September 21, 2025, just after 7:30 p.m., inside a Russian air defense command bunker overlooking the Black Sea, panic rippled through operators' consoles as over 70 fast-moving contacts swarmed their radar screens. These weren't NATO aircraft. They were Ukrainian drones executing an operation that combined precision deception and sheer audacity. For Russian forces, the Foros resort had long been considered untouchable, guarded by a state-of-the-art Pantsir S-1 air defense system and elite Spetsnaz units armed with Rex-1 jammers. But Ukrainian intelligence, leveraging the Atesh partisan network, knew the exact schedule of a secret war council meeting. The stakes were immense. A successful strike here would not only humiliate Russia's southern command, but also send a direct message to negotiators in Geneva. How could a handful of drones threaten a billion-dollar defense network? The answer lay in a meticulously planned illusion. Launched from a modified fishing vessel 6 miles offshore, 25 drones skimmed just 30 feet above the waves, exploiting the curvature of the Earth to evade radar detection. Of these 15 were decoys carrying signal transmitters, instead of explosives, programmed to replicate and multiply their presence on Russian radar screens. The result: confusion, wasted munitions, and a sudden oversaturation of Russia's automated defense systems. Pantsir missiles fired into the twilight, shredding 4 decoys, while Spetsnaz teams scrambled to intercept targets that existed only on a confused computer display. Yet the main swarm pressed onward, undeterred by gunfire or jamming attempts. Western military analysts have since described the operation as a textbook example of low-cost, high-impact electronic and physical deception. According to Defense News, such tactics exploit both human and automated response limitations, forcing overreaction and draining expensive ordnance reserves. NATO observers quietly noted that operations like this underscore the growing vulnerability of fixed installations along contested coastal regions, prompting reassessments of air and maritime defense strategies. U.S. experts point out that even high-tech defense networks are only as strong as their ability to discriminate threats, a capability Ukraine exploited with astonishing precision. The psychological impact was immediate. Operators in Crimea realized they had expended multi-million-dollar missiles on phantoms, while real threats remained hidden. Russian command scrambled Su-30 fighters and prepared coastal patrols. Yet the real strike forces were already embedded within the chaos. The illusion worked, not only because of the technology, but because of timing and audacity. The swarm moved as a living organism, unpredictable, relentless, and invisible until the final moments. Could such a small, inexpensive fleet of drones really upend a sophisticated defensive network? Audiences are left wondering how the Ukrainians engineered the next phase of the attack using the chaos they had so brilliantly orchestrated. What happens when modern radar and missile systems are faced with ghosts in the sky? As the Russian Pantsir S-1 systems engaged the Phantom drones, their operators were thrown into confusion. The 15 decoys broadcast false location data, effectively multiplying themselves into over 70 apparent threats. Each missile fired at these illusions represented millions of dollars wasted, while the real drones remained concealed within the radar clutter. On the ground, Spetsnaz teams aimed rifles and launched countermeasures, but the swarming drones moved too fast, too low, and too unpredictably for conventional defenses. The operation showcased a lethal combination of electronic warfare and kinetic strategy that left seasoned Russian officers bewildered. Military experts from the Royal United Services Institute note that this type of deception exemplifies cost-effective attrition warfare, where inexpensive unmanned systems can neutralize heavily fortified positions without direct engagement. The decoy drones acted as both distraction and shield-saturating radar and guidance systems to create openings for the real strike elements. In addition, Western analysts point out that Ukraine's use of modified civilian electronics, including RDU pilot chips, represents a new frontier in electronic attack capabilities, turning everyday components into precision warfare tools. The lesson was clear: even a billion-dollar defense infrastructure can be rendered ineffective with clever engineering and strategic misdirection. The Russian operators' panic was compounded by the overwhelming number of targets appearing simultaneously. Automated tracking systems struggled to prioritize, and human operators faced a deluge of conflicting information. Defense News reports that such saturation attacks not only deplete munitions, but also erode confidence in automated systems, leading to slower response times in subsequent engagements. NATO strategists observing the operation have raised alarms about the vulnerability of fixed coastal defenses, emphasizing the need for adaptive threat recognition protocols and integrated counter-UAV measures. Analysts suggest that similar tactics could influence future engagements in contested zones, from the Baltic Sea to the South China Sea, where low-cost drones could challenge expensive defensive assets. While the decoy drones drew fire, the real drones remained hidden within the chaos, using the cluttered signals as camouflage. Their electronic countermeasures jammed the X-band frequencies of targeting systems, temporarily blinding missile guidance, while confusing Spetsnaz teams on the ground. The result was a controlled corridor of vulnerability leading straight to the resort. For the Russians, the illusion was complete. Every action taken was reactionary, defensive, and ultimately misdirected. In essence, Ukraine had forced the Russians to fight shadows, giving the attackers the initiative without ever engaging directly. Could a swarm of low-cost drones realistically dictate the outcome of strategic operations? This question now dominated discussions in military think tanks across Washington and London. The success of the decoy phase demonstrated that the psychological dimension of warfare, confusion, misperception, and rapid decision-making under stress can be as decisive as firepower. The stage was now set for the real drones to strike, and the next moments would determine whether Ukraine's calculated gamble would succeed entirely or be partially thwarted by Russian improvisation. How do 10 drones slip past one of the most advanced air defenses in the world? While Russian operators remained engrossed in the illusion of the decoys, the 10 genuine drones began their critical maneuver. Each was equipped with modified RDU pilot chips, a civilian technology adapted into a sophisticated electronic warfare tool. As they moved through the radar-saturated environment, low-power jammers disrupted the X-band guidance of the Pantsir missiles, rendering target locks inconsistent and unreliable. Spetsnaz teams on the ground fired rifles and improvised countermeasures at shadows, their tracers arching harmlessly into the night sky. For the first time, the true threat emerged, blending invisibly into the chaos it had created. Military analysts note that this is a textbook example of exploiting both human and automated vulnerabilities simultaneously. By combining decoys with jamming-enabled drones, Ukraine forced Russian systems to overcommit to false targets, effectively neutralizing defensive fire, while preserving the real payloads. According to Defense News, such methods are now considered a game-changer in small-unit precision attacks, capable of crippling high-value targets with minimal expenditure. In this instance, 10 drones, each carrying only 1.5 pounds of high-explosive material, effectively bypassed a billion-dollar defensive network. NATO observers have flagged similar strategies as indicative of asymmetric warfare evolution, prompting member states to invest more heavily in counter-UAV systems and electronic warfare resilience. The drones advanced with calculated precision, each programmed to maintain optimal distance and speed, while synchronizing with the electronic noise from the decoy swarm. This coordination ensured that Russian systems could not differentiate between real and phantom targets. U.S. defense experts, citing reports from the Pentagon, emphasized that this demonstrates a shift in operational thinking. You no longer need mass to create strategic impact. Clever integration of technology and timing can achieve the same, if not greater, results. Such tactics force defenders to operate under uncertainty, a psychological strain that can influence decision-making far beyond the immediate battlefield. By 7:19 p.m., the 10 drones were just 1,000 feet from the Foros resort. The final challenge was the emergent brute force jamming from a nearby FSB villa, which threatened to disrupt their onboard electronics. In a calculated gamble, the operators on the fishing vessel pushed the drones into an all-or-nothing dive, sacrificing stealth for raw speed. Their batteries, drained by the sudden electronic interference, could only sustain flight for a few critical seconds. Yet the overwhelming radar confusion ensured that the Russian defenses could not respond in time. The path to the target was now open, illustrating the strategic power of combining electronic warfare, precision navigation, and deceptive tactics in modern conflict. What happens when the most sophisticated defense meets calculated ingenuity and relentless timing? The answer was about to be revealed as the drones prepared to deliver their payload. This moment not only tested technical innovation, but also the resilience of Russian command, offering NATO and Western observers a stark lesson on vulnerability adaptation and the evolving nature of drone-enabled warfare. Could a fleet of 10 small drones truly decide the fate of a high-profile target? As the Ukrainian drones approached the Foros resort, the final 1,000 feet became a battle against physics, electronics, and time itself. The FSB's portable jammer, activated in a nearby villa, unleashed a torrent of radio noise that threatened to overload the drone's systems. Battery levels on each craft began plummeting rapidly, dropping nearly 50% in just 15 seconds. Operators on the fishing vessel held their breath, knowing that even a minor failure could expose their entire intelligence network and turn the mission into a strategic disaster. Yet every calculation, every maneuver had been rehearsed and timed to perfection. In a daring maneuver, the drone operators abandoned stealth and pushed the aircraft into a final all-out sprint. The swarm's velocity now became its shield, with Russian radar and missile systems still bogged down by phantom signals. The decoy swarm's chaos functioned as a literal curtain, obscuring the real drones from view. Western analysts observing the mission via satellite imagery later described this as a surgical application of kinetic energy guided by psychological manipulation, a combination rarely seen outside classified special operations. Military Watch magazine noted that this approach redefines the concept of precision strike, minimal material, maximum impact, and a strategic message amplified far beyond the immediate destruction. The target was the resort's main restaurant, the site of a secret war council. Each drone carried a 1.5-pound high-explosive warhead with a 0.5-second delayed fuse designed to penetrate the building's interior before detonation. The physics of confined space explosions transformed such a small payload into a devastating internal blast, creating an overpressure that shattered walls, damaged support columns, and incapacitated electrical systems. Structural collapse was immediate, and for Russian forces on the ground, the scenario had escalated beyond mere defense. Their role shifted to frantic first responders, attempting to contain chaos already out of control. Satellite and drone reconnaissance confirmed the destructive precision of the strike, highlighting how minimal resources could inflict maximum disruption. Experts in electronic warfare and strategic studies point out that the combination of timing jamming and decoys represents a paradigm shift in coastal and urban defense vulnerability. NATO officials privately assess that fixed high-value sites along contested regions are now highly susceptible to small, inexpensive drones if defenders cannot rapidly discriminate threats. U.S. military analysts further note that operations like this could influence doctrine across multiple theaters, emphasizing agility, deception, and distributed unmanned capabilities over traditional massed firepower. In essence, Ukraine had turned asymmetry into a decisive strategic advantage. As the restaurant erupted from within, smoke and fire obscured the scene, but the operation was not yet complete. The fishing vessel, inconspicuous among civilian traffic, began dismantling the launch systems, discarding electronics overboard, and returning to a routine maritime profile. The question now remained, how would the Russian command respond to an attack that had bypassed every layer of defense and left a psychological scar across the southern front? The next chapter promised cascading consequences, both operational and diplomatic, that would reverberate far beyond Crimea. What happens when a small, precise strike topples the illusion of safety in a fortified region? As the dust settled over the Foros resort, Ukrainian military analysts began to assess both tangible and psychological damage. The restaurant's interior was leveled, support columns critically compromised, and the electrical grid of the building entirely fried. But beyond the physical devastation, the strike shattered Russian confidence. For the next 48 hours, senior commanders in Crimea were effectively blind. Artillery units hesitated to fire and coastal defense coordination stalled. Logistics already strained by ongoing Ukrainian operations ground to a near halt. Defense News reported that small unit UAV attacks like this one could paralyze entire operational zones for days, highlighting an economic impact that extends beyond immediate repairs, as resources must be diverted to reconnaissance redundancy and personnel safety measures. Psychologically, the effect was even more profound. Russian troops and commanders now understood that no location in Crimea was secure, not even luxury resorts previously considered beyond reach. Analysts from the Center for Strategic and International Studies observed that Ukrainian operations have fostered an environment of pervasive uncertainty where even routine fishing boats could conceal drone launch platforms. This paranoia affected decision-making. Commanders became hyper-cautious, delaying movements and creating gaps in operational readiness that Ukraine could exploit further. NATO military planners privately confirmed that such psychological operations amplify the impact of minimal physical attacks, creating strategic consequences disproportionate to the scale of destruction. On the diplomatic front, the timing of the strike sent a shockwave to Geneva, where Russian representatives were engaged in ceasefire discussions. Satellite imagery intercepted communications, and open-source intelligence revealed that the message was clear. Ukraine could impose terms through asymmetric operations, forcing a recalibration of Russian negotiation positions. Analysts from Al Jazeera noted that while Russia publicly framed the incident as terrorism, the real narrative of failed defense against a clever, low-cost strike resonated in Western capitals. U.S. military advisors indicated that this strike exemplifies the growing utility of hybrid warfare, blending kinetic effects with psychological pressure to shape diplomatic outcomes. Technically, the operation underscored the evolution of drone-based precision warfare. The combination of decoy swarms, electronic jamming, and delayed fuse warheads showcased a holistic approach to operational planning. Military experts compared it to modern iterations of historical raids, noting that success relied not on brute force, but on intelligence superiority, timing, and integrated electronic disruption. Defense News further emphasized that Russia's response, expending high-cost missiles and scrambling special forces to address non-existent threats, illustrates the increasing vulnerability of traditional air defense models to asymmetric tactics. The Foros strike set the stage for further domino effects along the southern front. Russian command networks, already disrupted, now faced cascading consequences in operational cohesion, logistics flow, and troop morale. Could Ukraine replicate such precision strikes on other high-value targets? Viewers are left to consider the wider implications for the Black Sea theater, NATO strategic planning, and the balance of power in Eastern Europe. How far-reaching can the impact of a single drone strike truly be? The aftermath of the Foros resort attack rippled across multiple layers of Russian military and political structures. With the resort's secret war council disrupted, the Black Sea Command Network experienced immediate operational paralysis. Artillery coordination faltered, coastal defense units hesitated, and logistics convoys already vulnerable slowed dramatically. Experts from Jane's Defense Weekly noted that the strike's economic implications extended beyond structural repair costs. The sudden reassignment of personnel, overreaction in defensive spending, and heightened security measures represented a substantial multi-million-dollar drain on resources at a time when Russia's southern front was already overextended. The psychological effect on commanders and rank-and-file personnel was equally profound, raising questions about the reliability of even heavily defended positions. NATO analysts highlighted the broader strategic implications. The operation demonstrated how asymmetric low-cost UAV tactics could undermine conventional defenses, forcing reconsideration of NATO and allied defense postures along contested maritime and coastal zones. Western military advisors emphasized that while Ukraine exploited vulnerabilities in Russian technology, the strike also showcased the operational principle that ingenuity and planning can outweigh sheer hardware superiority. The U.S. Department of Defense under President Donald Trump quietly acknowledged that such operations provide critical lessons in electronic warfare, decoy usage, and real-time intelligence exploitation. Lessons learned here could influence doctrine for allied nations in scenarios ranging from the Baltic to East Asia. The strike also sent a symbolic message at the Geneva peace talks. Russian negotiators faced the dual reality of diplomatic engagement and tactical embarrassment, a juxtaposition that could weaken their bargaining position. Satellite confirmation of the resort's devastation underscored the effectiveness of Ukraine's strategy, blending kinetic strikes with electronic deception to achieve both operational and psychological impact. Analysts from Defense News described this as warfare writ small but with outsized consequences, noting that modern conflicts increasingly reward precision, surprise, and integrated multi-domain tactics. The ripple effect continued across the Black Sea theater. Logistic chains slowed to a crawl, patrol routines became hyper-vigilant, and every civilian vessel was now scrutinized for potential drone launch capability. Western observers emphasized that such uncertainty is a force multiplier, the mere threat of attack forces adversaries to commit disproportionate resources to defense, weakening their offensive potential. US and NATO experts predict that Ukraine could continue to leverage these tactics in future operations, systematically targeting high-value nodes while preserving a low-cost, high-impact footprint. As Russian forces scrambled to recover command and regain operational confidence, the broader lesson became clear: modern conflicts are no longer solely contests of manpower or artillery, but of information deception and strategic foresight. Ukraine's operation illustrated that a small, well-coordinated drone squadron could disrupt entire command chains, influence diplomatic negotiations, and shift the psychological equilibrium of a battlefield. The question now looms: how will Russia adapt to these asymmetric challenges, and can traditional defense paradigms survive the era of inexpensive, precision-guided UAV warfare?